Hello and welcome back to Analysis. An Egyptian border patrol opened fire on a boat leaving Alexandria for Italy last week. The boat was carrying over 100 Syrian and Palestinian refugees. 2 were killed. This is the latest lethal illustration of a crisis facing Syrian refugees in Egypt. After the removal of President Mohamed Morsi, the Egyptian authorities tightened visa regulations for Syrians, and hostility towards Syrian refugees has grown considerably. They are accused of sympathising with Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood, and many have faced street harassment, abuse from the media and arbitrary arrest, with the fear of deportation always present. According to the United Nations Commission for Refugees, as of this month, there are approximately 125,000 Syrian refugees living in Egypt who are registered or awaiting registration. However, it's estimated that there are over 250,000 Syrian refugees residing in the country. Between July and September, 143 Syrian refugees were arrested, and these included children. The United Nations Commission for Refugees has repeatedly urged Syria's neighbouring countries to keep their borders open and heed the plight of those fleeing violence and strife.
In Syria, we are witnessing a physical destruction of the country, a collapse of many of the state institutions, and an enormous suffering of the people, those that are killed and those that have to flee in all directions. And in these circumstances, the most important contribution a country can give to this humanitarian drama is to keep the borders open for those in need of protection.
In the studio to discuss this issue with me are Ayman Abu Zaid from the first part of the programme. He's an Egyptian political commentator, and we're now joined by Nabal Istanbuli for the Syrian Opposition Coalition, and on Skype by Nadine Marouchi, who's an Egyptian freelance journalist, and Teddy Lepowski, who's reporting officer at the UNHCR based in Cairo. Welcome to the programme, all of you. So this is perhaps quite an unexpected development, that with the crisis in Syria growing, with the refugee problem getting greater, that there's an increasingly harsh treatment from the Egyptian government.
Yeah, there are like a kind of harsh treatment to the Syrian refugees in Egypt and to the Syrian residents in Egypt as well. I think that the official numbers, the right figures are exceeded 1 million Syrians in Egypt nowadays. They are like facing a very bad crisis, very bad situation living in there. I think that many of them have been detained. Some of them have been asked to leave Egypt. They have started fleeing out of Egypt, going back to Turkey. I think Syrians have started going to Egypt something like about a year and 2 months. Started from the city of Homs, then from Damascus and its suburbs, and from Aleppo. But nowadays, just to tell you just one story as an example, yesterday a family of 7 arrived to Egypt, to Cairo airport. They have a visa, but they have been not allowed to enter Egypt because they came via Turkish Airways, not via Egypt Airways. So that means that they don't have the permission from the intelligence forces in Egypt. So this is a very big problem they're facing nowadays. Syrians in Egypt are not like they were in a good situation, but nowadays they're facing lots of challenges to stay there.
It's not just Syrians as well. There's a pretty ugly mood directed at some Palestinians, isn't there now?
That's right, and you know, unsurprisingly, what's the common thing between the Palestinians and the Syrians? You know, I think it's politically motivated. They fall as part of this picture of you know, terrorizing people so that people can bow down to the Sisi regime, which is in alignment with the Syrian regime. There is no difference between the two. They're both killing their people, and they're both working on a dictatorship to make people bow down to new way of ruling. We've seen Sisi open the Syrian embassy immediately after the coup. We've seen the Egyptian ambassador go back to Damascus, and there's a very close marry between the Egyptian government now and the dictatorship in Syria. So I think it's all going in the same direction, that you're not allowed to defect from your leadership. You're not allowed to ask for democracy except what's put on the table in the way that these dictators want, and it will be limited to what they want, and you're not allowed to ask for any rights, beyond what's given to you. So there is very, very close harmony between the Egyptian leadership and the Syrian leadership, and they're both treating, their people in the same way.
Let me bring in Teddy Lepowski here. Teddy, do you think that this is now quite a severe problem? Is the number of instances that you're hearing of the mistreatment of Syrian refugees growing?
Well, I mean, it is true that the sentiment towards Syrians has shifted dramatically. I mean, prior to early July, the environment was very welcoming. The Syrians were able to enter the country without a visa and provided residency. Also, the Egyptian government had given a provision of access to education and healthcare on the same footing as Egyptians. And I mean, on a positive note, the Egyptian government did continue this, or has announced that they've continued this policy into the new school year. So Syrians still do have access to the education, which is a very positive development. But nevertheless, I mean, indeed, the Syrians, because of the alleged involvement of some Syrians in demonstrations in late June, early July, that got picked up by the media and sort of mushroomed, the Syrian community at large became sort of characterized as being with one party and of being sympathetic. And so, yes, there have been incidents of verbal abuse, insults, assaults, and also detentions, arrests. And there is a feeling of anxiety. The Syrian community keeps on telling us and reinforcing that they feel insecure and unwelcome.
Nadim Marouchi, how do you read the mood now? Is this something that you think will quickly pass, or do you think it's settling down into a kind of a strand of chauvinism?
Well, I mean, I can only tell by the stories that I hear from Syrian refugees themselves. So, while it is quite a positive development that the Ministry of Education hasn't cancelled that decision of equal access to education, the reality is that Syrians are still facing bureaucratic hell on the ground. So a woman called me up yesterday, a woman that I had interviewed, to say that she had been at the Department of Education trying to register her kids at a public school since 6 a.m. And by midday, nothing had happened yet. And in fact, they told her to come back next week when she would be registered. So, I mean, I think the understanding is that she will eventually be able to register her kids in a public school, but they're basically going to make Syrians go through a difficult bureaucratic process to get there. So I think the sentiment. The sentiment is still somewhat hostile. Unfortunately, Syrian refugees are one of the casualties of the broader political conflict that's going on in Egypt, as you've all highlighted, and it has to be understood within a generally hostile atmosphere for refugees in Egypt. Syrians are but the latest casualty. But obviously, African refugees have experienced their fair share of hostility. Whenever there's a political crisis on a government level, refugee communities feel it at a community level.
How do you think that the kind of the attitude towards the Palestinians is playing? Because there's always been a very broad current of support for Palestine in Egypt, and to find Palestinians on the receiving end of some of this kind of treatment. How do you think that plays with the popular mood?
Well, the thing is, I mean, you're right. There is this notion that there's populace of support for Palestinians, but again, the Palestinian issue in Egypt, like much of the Arab world, is highly politicized. Again, a lot of Palestinians are branded as Hamas supporters, and obviously Hamas is a offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And again, they're just one of the casualties of the conflict, of the broader conflict going on between Egypt and Morsi supporters, and obviously Hamas and the people like Gaza falls within that. So it's not surprising that Palestinians are becoming are a part of the casualty. And again, there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to Palestinians in Egypt, amongst Egyptians actually. That it's not quite as black and white as all Egyptians support Palestinians. In fact, the reality is quite the opposite. So I wasn't actually that surprised by the news.
Eamon, I mean, the military government has taken a number of steps towards free movement in and out of Gaza that take us back to the Mubarak era, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Just what was mentioned about the Palestinians being victims as well of this treatment as refugees. It's not Palestinians as a whole, it's the Gazans. And again, it's all politically motivated, and it's all based on the assumption of what camp are these people in, and therefore we're going to penalise or we're going to open the doors wide open. Funny enough, the doors are being wide opened for the Israelis to come in and do tourism, especially now. Whereas the doors are being closed for the Gazans to even come and treat themselves inside the Egyptian territories. Obviously, we are back to the Mubarak regime, but who would guess that there is no big difference between the Sisi regime and the Mubarak regime? I personally say that the coup was something that was planned very, very early days, even at the time of President Morsi becoming president. I would say, and this was part of the tactic, let them go in, we'll make them fail, we'll come out of all these social issues that demonize the way that they perform or the way that they look in front of the people, and then we'll do some sort of activity or coup that will overturn things. I think it's all been predetermined and pre-planned, and we've now seen, unfortunately, the outcome of this. So yes, we are back to the Mubarak regime. We're going to see unfortunately, a lot of oppression towards the Egyptian people and towards the Palestinians and Syrians and anyone else that is deemed to be part of the non-American camp, if you like, because there is a hidden marriage between the Sisi regime and the American administration, even if Obama doesn't make it clear, except now, coming out now saying that President Morsi couldn't govern. Where were you over the last few weeks, since the coup?
Nabal, do you think this is changing attitudes among Syrian refugees to the government? These are the people who are on the sharp end of this. Do you think they're becoming more hostile to the current Egyptian regime?
To be honest, I don't think that this is going to affect. The most important thing is that the Syrian refugee situation inside Egypt, how they being dealt with, the way they are being dealt with, rather than they're who they support, or if they support the current government or the previous one or whatsoever. Because Syrians fled out of Syria just from the crisis, so they just want to be safe and not to fall into another crisis, not to be. We've seen some Egyptians just on the media as well, just saying straight away that Syrians are unwelcome in Egypt, asking them to leave, and it's difficult nowadays to get the visa to go for Syrians to go to Egypt. You will have a chance to get a visa, just if in case of that your first step relatives are there. But just to add something to what Nadine said, yes, they have frozen the delegation for the Syrians, for the tuition fees for Syrians, but not for all Syrians. So who comes now, who wants to register now, he has to pay the full fees as a foreigner, as foreigner students, which is something equals 3,000 sterling pounds, while who have been registered before last year or something like that is being dealt just like Egyptian. One more thing, a new delegation as well has been announced, a new statement saying that Syrians are not allowed to get a permission to open their companies anymore. They are not allowed to invest in Egypt anymore. This puts all Syrians in Egypt in a very bad situation, in a real crisis. Maybe the same or worse, maybe, than the crisis they flee their country because of.
Teddy, we said in the introduction to the programme that the UNHCR has been calling on countries, neighbouring countries, to keep their borders open. Do you think that what's happening in Egypt will set an example, a bad example, that will allow other neighbouring states to have a harsher attitude towards Syrian refugees?
Well, I mean, we haven't seen that to be the case, and I mean, the Egyptian authorities announced this measure would be temporary, citing security concerns. So it remains to be seen. But so far, as a number of Syrians have been leaving, and many of them are going to Turkey, to Lebanon, to Jordan, and to some other countries in the region where visas are not required.
So in a sense, what the Egyptian government is doing is simply pushing the refugee problem onto its neighbours.
Well, I mean, to some extent, I mean, the numbers of Syrians in the country, as you mentioned, are about a quarter of a million, or about 250 to 300,000. And I mean, many of them have sort of settled in, and although they're feeling anxiety, they are enrolling their children in school. They are still finding the work or running their business. So, I mean, it is sort of over a wide spectrum that, I mean, in terms of degree, that some people are feeling more at risk or more frustrated and choosing to leave Turkey in that regard. And then still the element of having the border open. I mean, this is a concern, and hopefully it will change in time. Because prior to the 8th of July, when the visa restrictions were put in place, prior to that, the environment was rather welcoming, and we saw an increasing number of Syrians coming here. Many of them had resided in Lebanon or Jordan previously, and chose to move to Egypt because of the lower cost of living compared to the other countries, compared to Lebanon, Jordan, and also because of the welcoming environment.
Nadine, we've sort of located this as part of the wider politics that have emerged since the military took over on the 3rd of July. Do you think that the case of the Syrians and of the Palestinians is part of a wider eroding of the popularity of El-Sisi? Do you think that people are beginning to say, well, maybe things aren't quite the way they should be?
As in, do you mean that? Do I think that things are changing and that
is the popular mood? There was a degree of popular support, obviously, for the El-Sisi government. Do you think that's eroding now or not, or do you think it's as strong as it was before?
No, it's just as staunch as it was before. Sisi's posters can be seen in many places across Cairo and elsewhere in Egypt. And in fact, there's a campaign encouraging him to run for president. No, I think the mood is still quite supportive of El-Sisi. The mood hasn't changed just yet. There are some parts of the country where it might be changing, and in Sinai particularly, where there's a war against militants and war against terrorism that's quite unpopular on the ground with many people. But certainly in Cairo, I feel that the mood is still very much pro-Sisi. Of course, pro-Morsi protests continue every week on a weekly basis, but it hasn't shifted to such an extent yet.
Eamon, do you think that's true? Do you think that we're in for a long haul here?
No, I would quite debate that. I wouldn't say that Sisi's popularity is increasing. I think a lot of people who thought that there will be objectivity in what Sisi did on the 3rd of July have now realized that it was a coup and have realized that they were brought down to the streets for that purpose. I'm not saying that he doesn't have any supporters, but not to that extent, and it's definitely decreasing, not increasing at all. Now, the fact that he's putting himself forward, or people are putting him forward for presidency, it doesn't necessarily give me an indication that we're in a normal democracy, such as the UK, for example, where that gives an indication that there's some sort of popularity on the street, and therefore he can put himself forward as president. He's obviously forcing himself, towards presidency, and I would say that there is American backing to push him in that, because America loves, military ruling, especially in a country like Egypt. So I'd say definitely his popularity is going down. People are starting to realize, children are starting to realize, the youth are starting to realize, the elders are starting to realize that this was a coup, and there's something not going right, because the so-called democracy that he said obviously, first of all, he said that there was going to be presidential elections. We haven't heard anything about that. We're not seeing objectivity in the way the country's being governed at the moment under Biblawi, and we're not seeing objectivity in the way things are moving forward. They say there's a roadmap, but there's nothing practically there. It's just dictatorship that's prevailed in the country.
Nabeel, just to focus back on the question of the Syrian refugees, do you get much impression about how much this is stoked by the media in Egypt? Because obviously there's been a sort of a considerable change in the political atmosphere coming from the media. Is that part of the issue here?
Yeah, it may be I think it's a part of the issue because, as I mentioned before, Egyptian media, I won't talk about all of them, but some of them, let's say at least, are trying to speak about Syrian refugees in hatred ways. They are provoking people to be against Syrian beings or residency in Egypt, and that's why some Syrians started to flee to leave Egypt as well. Some of them. This creates another crisis, another problem, or many kinds of problems. One of them, as you mentioned in your report, you've read just at the very beginning, that some of them try to go using a boat to travel over the Mediterranean Sea, and they are not secure at all. They are can die at any time. Another issue that some of them went back to Turkey. This made more Syrians fleeing to Turkey. This has raised the prices and rental prices as well. So this affects all Syrians, not just Syrians in Egypt. But yes, there are some kind of media saying or just announcing that Syrians are unwanted in Egypt.
Teddy, just briefly, what's your view? Is the media a help or a hindrance in this?
Sorry, say that again, please.
Is the media a help or a hindrance in this?
It's only been some news outlets and some anchors that have really taken up a vitriol discourse against the Syrians and inflamed the views. There have been some anchors that have spoken out in favor and in support of the Syrian community, addressing the point that the negative views should not, because of some actions of a few, should not be or cause views or cause negative treatment for the community at large.
And Nadine, what's your view? You're there watching this stuff come out. Are you shocked sometimes by the attitudes?
I mean, certainly in July we were hearing some pretty shocking statements come out by certain television presenters. Especially when there were reports that Syrians were participating in protests. Some television hosts were saying, either stop supporting the Muslim Brotherhood or Egyptians will come and destroy your home. So quite inflammatory stuff. There's generally quite a level of sensationalism in Egyptian media, in the television and in a lot of newspapers as well. So it's part of a broader lack of standards really in a lot of the Egyptian press that unfortunately is Syrians are falling casualty to.
Well, thanks very much for that. And I'm afraid that brings us to the end of our discussion of events in the last week or so in Egypt. But do join us for more coverage of world affairs in future editions of Analysis. Thank you for watching.